Propaganda rag Buzzfeed does a hit piece on Dan, Cathy, and Trilith. He's racist, and they're racist with their racery racers and racistness. Racist.
I don't know if it's cloudy or bright.
All right, welcome back to the Free Mind Podcast. Back in the saddle. If you're watching us, you might be wondering why we have a different background, and it's a little bit darker than normal. We are not at home today, so we don't have our fancy smancy lights that our Patreon folks helped us to fund. So we just got these regular old yellow lights up here, and the sun's going down behind us, but we are in the land of the living, and that's what counts. And I got my Propel shirt on, if you can see it. We're actually at immersion camp. This is like the last night of it here down in Pine Mountain, Georgia, and it's been an amazing time as always.
Yes.
In fact,
so much fun.
Yeah. What was what's your highlights from the camp?
Oh my gosh! Besides the kids who are amazing, just the content.
Yeah.
The rich, heavy content. I mean, they dive deep. Day one, it's like, why do I believe Christianity? Is it true? Is it reliable? Critical race theory. Identity, gender, identity, transgenderism, homosexuality,
right?
pornography. I mean, they go
Christianity,
progressive. Some heavy hitters.
And they really
in.
don't hold back for these high school students. They go hard, like it's first rate.
No
deep.
doubt. I'm poking stuff like, they did just say that? Yes,
right.
They did, because they'll hear it in culture, and so might as well confront it and just understand what those words and terms mean.
For
so
sure.
It's been amazing.
It's been amazing. So it's something, if you're thinking about it, man, I can't recommend these camps enough. They got Propel, which is amazing, Immersion, which is 2 weeks, and then the Fellows program. I just highly, 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 highly recommend it if you can get your high school kids out here, man. It's such a good equipping.
Yeah.
In fact, I wish, like I've been trying to think for years, like even talking with Jonathan, the director there, is like, man, how do we get this stuff
amazing.
into churches?
Oh.
Because I tell you, if we talk a lot about Reformation and revival, awakening in the church, man. And I think a big part would be this is such a big part to really understand the biblical worldview and how to really be able to stand when it's confronted by the cultural ideas that are coming at it day in and day out.
And even some of the kids were like, man, we don't talk about this anyway. We don't get to discuss this or learn of it.
Yeah.
So in schools, they'll probably learn the opposite. So
for sure.
It's just good to get that kind of understanding and teaching from a Christian framework. So it's been awesome.
And they also have the classes like you could do with your family online. So check it out, Impact 360. The link will be in the show notes. All right, so let's get to this thing. If you're watching, you can follow along. I'm going to pull up the article here. If you're not familiar with Buzzfeed, it's a pretty much a traditional fundamentalist Baptist magazine. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. I'm about to say what?
No, it's your straight up, progressive leftist, just like most mainstream media is. If you click around here, I won't take the time to do it on the show, but you can see their categories. You got here just inequality, LGBTQ are two of the many categories. And if you flip through those, you'll definitely see which perspective they come from. There's a clear ideology at play. Like anything else, like there is no completely neutral zone, which is fine, but it's good to know where an article's coming from, just so you can read in, like, what are their assumptions, what are their presuppositions that are kind of like playing into how they're interpreting different data points, what they decide to share, what they decide to leave out, all that kind of stuff. And that goes for reading any book, listening to any speaker, including us. We have our assumptions, we have our presuppositions. The difference is with leftism and progressivism as an ideology, Marxism, whatever you want to call it. I think of this little thought experiment that I've heard before. I can't remember where, but if you're talking to a guy and he says all Cretans are liars, and you know that he's a Cretan, you're in a bit of a bind, because if it's true that all Cretans are liars, then he's lying. But if he's lying, then all Cretans are liars. Is that true? Like you're in a bind. But if he's a Cretan and he's lying about the fact that all Cretans are liars, then he's lying. So either way, I don't know. I'm at this like, mind blown,
do?
like skeptical back and forth thing where you bounce back and forth and you can't say anything. That's the problem with progressivism. And we pull this together in other podcasts, but with postmodernism, which is really the root or the foundation of Marxism, and especially how like critical theory plays out, which is this, Buzzfeed is infused with critical theory. At the root of postmodernism is the idea that there is no objective truth. There is no objective knowledge. There's just power plays. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's the interpreter that brings the meaning to the text. There's different versions of postmodernism, but the big idea is there's no meta-narrative. There's no objective truth. That's why you'll hear in the critical theory talk that when people try to appeal to scientific evidence or objectivity, they'll call that whiteness, for instance, at the Smithsonian African American Museum, because they're saying there is no such thing. So when people claim objectivity, they're using their power and they're using their hegemony to pull that on people so they can act like they're objective, but there is no such thing. So therefore it's a power play. So if you know that the person's worldview that they're starting from doesn't hold to objective truth, what does that mean then about everything they're going to try to convince you of? That means if they're consistent with their presuppositions, they're only going to use reason, quote unquote, to prop up a viewpoint. They're not going to care about objectivity or honesty or am I really presenting this fairly? It doesn't matter. There is no fairly. There's no objectivity. There's just basically we've got to make things equal. We got to prop up our narrative. And that's where you get AOC that time when she got caught lying about something. She said, well, it's not factually correct, but it's morally correct. What does she mean by that? She means, well, this data that I presented supports my narrative, and the narrative is for a good end.
Oh my!
It's for a good moral cause. Therefore, it doesn't matter if it's factually correct. That's why when it comes to reading progressive outlets, it's an extra layer of skepticism added on to our normal, like, trust and verify kind of setting, because their very worldview undermines their authority, which requires trust, which requires honesty, and at least an attempt to be objective as much as possible, even though you come from a certain perspective.
Wow. Okay.
So that's why when you look at all these news outlets, I don't take any of them at face value. Some of the straightforward data points, like this happened in 1920, or that's fine, because that's too easy. They don't want to undermine the persuasion of their narrative by giving, mistaken facts, quote unquote. So usually their straightforward facts will not be in error, although sometimes that even happens. But especially the closer it gets to like the narrative element, you have to have a disposition, not of trust and verify with them, verify. Everything has to be verified.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, because you really, with journalism, you ideally you want to be in the case that even though if you know someone's coming from a perspective, you feel like they're fair-minded and they're going to present as best as they possibly can an accurate scenario of the situation, or accurate portrayal of the situation. But unfortunately here we can't simply take anything for granted, and we have to say, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, who knows, but I'll have to verify. But I'm going to try to do the best I can to just sort of take this at face value. And again, the writer here, her name is Brianna Sachs, and you can tell, you can I flipped through some of her articles. Clearly, the ideology she's coming from. It's just, it's your typical, leftist progressivist thing, which is fine, but just good to know. So let's jump on in. Let me say one more thing too. Thinking worldviewishly, right? You want to have a good idea. In order to understand the counterfeit, you need to know the real, right? So what is the real? What is biblical justice? Biblical justice is impartiality. God hates unequal weights and measures. So things need to be equal in measure. You need to judge. It's sort of like that statement of Martin Luther King Jr., people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That it would be just an example of what biblical justice is like. You also have, the idea that, someone always sounds right when they present their case first until it's cross-examined. In a lot of journalism now, you have no cross-examination or no real attempt at it. You'll have them pretend to, but it's just not typically much on that side. But the thing with the impartiality is important because that runs directly against critical race theory as presented by Ibram X. Kendi, for instance, and Robin DiAngelo. According to Ibram X. Kendi, this is a reminder for those. I would just recommend you go back and listen to our podcast with Neil Shenvi or Sam Say on this topic to get an in-depth discussion. But Ibram X. Kendi says basically all you have to do is count a room, like walk into a room and count the races. If one race is overrepresented, there's racism. It's because it's not a safe space. Now that, of course, it only goes one way because it has to be the oppressor races, which, the canonical oppressor race is white, but you could have white adjacent and Asian versus black. If you had too many Asians, especially Asians that act white, quote unquote, then it's Asian racism against black folks if black folks aren't represented enough in number in a particular case. So all you have to do is count heads according to Ibram X. Kendi, and the disparity in the number of races represented in any, you could say, leadership or even in the room shows you if there's racism or not. The second part is, especially for Robin DiAngelo, is that racism is always present. There's no, there just is no getting rid of systemic racism. It's always there. The question is, how is it manifesting itself? Okay. So if you start with that disposition and you implement Ibram X. Kendi's sort of tools or activist ways to get rid of that, he actually says you should engage in racism in order to fix the quote unquote racism that's already there. And that is what basically how he defines his anti-racism and how to be an anti-racist. So let's give a quick example. Yeah. There's a board of, I don't know, whatever, and there's 6 people and you have 5 of them are white. Ibram X. Kendi says right away he has to do no other investigation. Racism.
Directly tied to racism.
How do you fix it? You just got to get rid of some of the white people, hire black people in their place. And now is that more even. Is that hiring process biblical? Is that equal weights and measures? Because the Bible says, basically the way of Scripture in that sense is you hire the person that's most qualified, and you don't look. It shouldn't be determined by their economic status, the hue of their skin, whatever. It's you give the position to who best deserves it or earns it. That's kind of the justice element. For him, it's not like that. You got to prop it up in terms of race. So he would actually be racist according to the biblical definition of racism.
Yeah.
And so that just gives you kind of a helpful contrast between the two different views here.
Yeah.
Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that's good. Good clarity.
And sorry that's
good old fashioned fairness and meritocracy is not a tool of the critical race theorist.
No. Yeah. So
no context, no background, just mere appearance of evil, quote unquote. Okay.
Make the outcomes equal because, as they'll say, like America is racist in its DNA. It's done all this in the past. So now, of course, people have pointed out the ridiculous nature of his thesis, and by his definition of racism, the NBA is racist toward blacks because they're overrepresented. And so it's just it's such a terrible argument. It's hard to take seriously, but it's had a lot of influence on people. And last thing I'll say before we hop into this article here, there's another analogy that sometimes you'll talk about in epistemology, which is the widget factory. And so widgets just you walk into a factory and you got all these widgets, these things that are being made for whatever purpose. Now, if someone says, oh man, all these widgets are red, but you find out that person has red glasses on that makes everything appear red.
Oh boy. Okay.
In that case, you no longer know whether or not the widgets are red, right? Because they if they're not red, they're still going to appear red to that person talking.
Very much so.
But they could be red, but we just don't know
if they're
until you take those glasses off and have a better viewpoint of it. or a different way to maybe test and see if the widgets are in fact red.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's called like the problem of warrant or justification. And so the problem with CRT is it provides lenses. So it gives you those lenses. So if we put on the Robin DiAngelo lenses and we say, well, everything's racist, therefore we just got to find out where it manifests, then you're going to interpret things that may or may not be racist as racist.
Yeah.
It's like having the red glasses on. So somebody looks at you in a certain kind of way, you're automatically going to say racism. Or you know, somebody overlooks you and you raise your hand in the classroom and they pick the Asian person on the left. If you've got those CRT glasses on, it's because of racism.
Yeah.
Right. And so the problem is we just don't know because CRT has already given you those glasses. And that's so thoroughly infused in our culture that now unless you're fighting this ideology, everybody has the disposition already to label something as racist.
Wow. Yeah.
Last clarification before we jump into this.
Okay, go
what is racism, biblically speaking? Again, it's race-based impartiality or prejudice against people based on their race. Mm-hmm. So you have the really strong version, which is the examples, you know, the easy ones like the KKK, chattel slavery, Jim Crow. Clearly racism, clearly sin, clearly unbiblical.
Mm-hmm.
Then you also might have the, like let's call it racism type 2. Like you got diabetes type 1 and type 2. KKK is racism 1. Racism 2 would be like more subtle, but still racist things. Like if someone did see you raise your hand in that example, and they overlook you because in their heart, they don't like black people. Mm-hmm. Now that would be a racist action on a more subtle degree. And that can be a real thing. The problem is obviously between those two, which one's harder to discern as an outsider?
Yeah,
the second one. And what CRT does is it flattens everything into that. Like it doesn't matter and it labels them all with the same degree of racism. Yeah. But it also has a third category that adds on to it. And that's the Ibram X. Kendi disparities by themselves, those kinds of things. Now, that's not biblical racism. So you have to be careful not to allow them to define racism and act like that's a sin, because not all the forms of racism that they call, not all the forms of whatever they've put together under that term heading are actually sinful biblical racism. Mm-hmm. So you have to be careful to parse those out. You also have to understand, go back and listen to those ones on systemic racism. You have to define that carefully because they'll define systemic racism based on disparity alone. And really, if you're gonna look for real systemic racism, it has to be a racist policy. Like the policy has to be geared at or motivated by racist motivations or to intentionally. There's an argument for you can unintentionally do it too. I'll leave that one to the side for now. Neil talks about that, but basically the Ibram X. Kendi version is far from. It's just in clown world when it comes to that. Whew, that's a mouthful. Yeah, so now let's hop into this.
Okay.
Trilith promised a new model for Hollywood and the Atlanta suburbs, but black residents and former employees say racism lies just below the surface. Ooh, racism. Ominous. Okay. So, we got Fayetteville, Georgia. In 2013, Dan Cathy, the 69-year-old billionaire who leads his family's fast food empire, Chick-fil-A, saw hundreds of acres of wheat fields near where he grew up and had a vision. At the time, the Atlanta area was becoming the Hollywood of the South thanks to massive tax breaks from state lawmakers, and Cathy was working with the UK-based Pinewood Studios to turn the land 30 miles south of downtown into a state-of-the-art production complex. As the studio grew, landing massive clients like Disney's Marvel Studios, he and a team of developers planned a new kind of company town alongside it, a quaint but diverse community modeled after European villages to draw artists and entertainment industry players to the suburbs. So a lot of people don't know about that. Mm-hmm. You told me about that a few years ago, and my mind was blown.
Yeah, we have a mutual friend who lives in the area, and he became like a stand-in actor for some of the big-time movies, Marvel movies and other movies. he would be like a stand-in for someone in Guardian of the Galaxies, or Captain America. And so he was the one to tell me that Dan Cathy was building these studios years ago, and even took me on a tour of one of them. It was fantastic. They're massive studios, and people come here and, like the article says, make movies for the tax break, and it's phenomenal. If you ever get to visit, it's called Pinewood Studios, and it's amazing.
Yeah, so apparently, when he opened it, it was Pinewood. I didn't know they changed the name recently to this Trilith.
Right,
and,
me either.
So they built. We knew he was building. Like when we first went there, they just had a few houses up.
Yeah.
We happened to just go there this past week, and it was crazy. Like how much work they had done.
It's phenomenal. It's a beautiful town with the most, gorgeous looking homes. It's real, just next level eclectic, just beautiful. Just the parks, the area, the restaurants, the shops.
Top notch.
Top notch. It looks, you see it and he's like, okay, I want to live in here, but you can't afford to live in here, but it's still beautiful. We walked through the area. We hung out for a couple of hours because we have friends that live there that are really dear friends, and it was just a wonderful experience all throughout. We went inside the gym, we went to various shops, and we just saw. My experience was it was diverse and nice and beautiful, friendly throughout.
Yeah, for sure. And some of this that she's going to be reporting on is really anecdotal. She's asking people and they're telling her their experience. Okay. No, and that's fine. But just for what it's worth, our experience was nothing like a few of these people are representing here.
No doubt.
And it was actually the opposite. The gym was like,
it was great.
Yeah, it was. I don't remember. It just didn't have that vibe.
It didn't have the vibe of anything we're about to read to you. In fact, I remember years ago, Dan himself took us on a tour of the studios and showed us around, and it was just super excited. He was just kind, and my experience with Dan is great.
It's been
really great.
It's been great, and
that's all we're saying. Okay,
that's good and helpful, babe, because I think it's important. We've known these people for years. We know a lot of the people surrounding, the Cathys, your friends. And so it just it's funny to watch how they
absolutely
kind of weave this story here.
We were just there like 3 days. Okay, go ahead.
So here's Cathy. It says, "We've been very careful to envision a community that will attract a wide spectrum of people, that will inspire folks to live well and to honor others. I believe this is the model for future generations," Cathy said in 2016. Somewhere.
Okay.
It says Andrew Young's 90th birthday celebration or something. Or maybe that was a separate picture, who knows. But by 2017, what was then called Pinewood Atlanta Studios had become the second largest studio in the U.S. behind only Burbank, California's Warner Brothers. Wow. Which is amazing to me. I didn't even realize
in
that.
Georgia. Okay.
Creating unprecedented opportunities for Georgia to attract major shoots, according to a state Senate report about its exploding entertainment industry. Pinewood Atlanta's 18 stages were consistently booked, former employees told Buzzfeed News. And parts of 2019's Avengers Endgame were filmed there. In 2019, Cathy's Family Trust bought out Pinewood, rebranding it as Trilith, a nod to its three pillars of storytelling, purpose-built places, and emerging technology. The studio has grown to 24 stages and signed a 5-year contract with Marvel Studios. Recent productions include Disney Plus's Mrs. Marvel's miniseries, talks about Netflix show. Let's see. This is a former studio executive told BuzzFeed that, quote, "He wants to build an engine equal to Disney, and no one is going to question that. Chick-fil-A runs this town. Everyone trusts what Dan Cathy says," end quote. So I don't know if this is a friend or foe here. She kind of, sets it up like everyone trusts this man.
Whatever he says goes, kind of thing. However.
there's like a hidden however there, right? Across the street, about 1,000 people, roughly a quarter of whom are in the entertainment industry, moved to the town at Trilith, a 235-acre housing development within the city of Fayetteville. Though the homes, at an average price of around $600,000, cost nearly twice as much as others in the area, People were drawn in by the neighborhood's promise. So she's trying to set up this thing here where like, oh man, it's twice as much, but they're coming because of the promise. What is that promise? Okay. She continues, marketing materials portray it as a forward-thinking, diverse community in stark contrast with other suburbs of Atlanta, the kind of place where neighbors smile and wave at each other as they walk their dogs. Kids ride their bikes to a private school, and bakery owners know their regular names and orders. And honestly, it does kind of have that feel. We went in a lot of those shops, and the people seemed like they knew, our friends walking in by name and knew, kind of a little bit about each other. Whether or not they marketed it to be different than the surrounding towns and we're better than them, I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical of this kind of contrasting picture she's creating here, but I'll just give her that. That's fine. And in the next few years, the town hopes to grow to 5,000 people with a boutique hotel and more retail spots already under construction. I'm going to skip down here a little bit. Here's where she starts to get into the nuts and bolts. So I wish I had a soundtrack here to read this, but it says, but tensions were simmering beneath the town's shiny veneer. You see the parallel too. She's almost creating material between the town and Dan Cathy. Everybody trusts Dan, but here's Trilith's, beautiful picture on the outside. And that
there's
people
a promise,
love.
The promise.
People love that stuff. It's rhetorically useful to do that, which is fine, if it's true. But we'll see. When black families used the community pool, there were stairs. Sorry.
You're so silly. Let me read it.
90% of the people in the gym that day we were in were black folks.
It was black
chilling,
for sure.
Doing their thing.
I was like, hey,
running the classes.
It was
great. This sounds funny to me, but property was damaged. Sorry, continue on here. Property was damaged and the wrong children were blamed. There were discussions popping up in the community Facebook group about who was using the basketball court and whether they belonged in the town at all. A police cruiser followed a black teenager one night. So this is her. She's saving her big one. The big note here, but she continues on. Black residents and employees of the adjoining studio began to feel like something was very off. 20 people, 8 of whom spoke anonymously because they feared retribution, said they had experienced or witnessed the kind of discrimination that's more veiled and understated than the type of behavior that typically captures headlines. So which type of racism are these supposed 8 out of 20 people who spoke anonymously claiming? They're claiming the softer type, type 2, which we discussed. Which again, we said is the more difficult one, not impossible. Prove, some people, there are times when it's clear that someone's kind of hating and you can see the
hard-based
vibe.
Evidence, and then other times it's,
especially like I said, given our culture where people have been trained to put on the CRT glasses, nowadays it literally is like everyone's in the factory with red glasses on. So that makes it even harder to just believe someone when they tell you that that's going on.
It's like everyone a racist until proven otherwise. Right.
And in D'Angelo's world, it can't be proven otherwise.
You can't ever.
You can just find a different way to manifest it.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you'll see why I'm charging this writer with kind of having bought into the woke ideology, and we'll see why here in a minute. But that's the rough sketch of what she's talking about: stairs at the community pool, police cruiser following someone. So let me continue here. It wasn't the type that typically captures the headlines, but what they described was systemic. Woven into everyday interactions and business exchanges. So part of CRT, again, is that systemic racism is always everywhere. With us. Yeah. So this would not be unique if about Trilith, for instance. This would be happening at Buzzfeed as well. Because systemic racism's everywhere. It's just a matter of how it manifests. So somebody could write this article on them and say the same thing, But at least she's going to try to persuade people that are skeptical by giving them specific examples. So she said this: what they describe was systemic. Black former employees of Trilith Studios and Trilith Development, the two companies that operate the enterprise, told BuzzFeed News they were reprimanded or fired for asking for more responsibilities and leadership opportunities. Black residents described being treated differently on issues from home repairs to how their children were perceived by neighbors. Afraid of alienating themselves in the new neighborhood, they said they stayed silent. Now, if you took one of those, each at a time, that they were reprimanded or fired for asking for more responsibilities and leadership opportunities, based on what I know about anybody I've met on there, that seems to me very doubtful. That they asked for more responsibilities. They're like, you're fired.
Right.
Can I have more leadership?
Yeah.
That to me sounds like propaganda 101. But let's just, again, let's give her the benefit of the doubt here and say, man, maybe that was. If there was some reason for thinking that, there might be, at best here, an opportunity to investigate. Yeah. I would investigate it.
For sure.
I wouldn't simply take people's word for it, because that sounds fishy to me. That doesn't pass the smell test based on what I know about people that work at Chick-fil-A or work at Trilith.
Sure. Okay.
Black residents being treated differently on home repairs, possibly worth looking into. We'll see. Afraid of alienating themselves, so they stayed silent.
Yeah, I wouldn't live in a community like that and pay that much and experience that and be silent if that were me. So it's like, I don't know, that the fact that this is so veiled in its, give us an example of a specific example. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, and so
give us more to work with.
Yeah,
to process.
So she does do that. Thankfully, here's
cool.
So here's her big one.
All right.
So she's saying that this was all, they were all silent. That is until March, when a Ring camera recorded a white resident ranting at her husband outside her black neighbor's house, referring to its occupants as the N-word.
Okay, now that
the racist incident sparked a reckoning as some black residents realized that they were far from alone and feeling like outsiders in a place sold on belonging. Two black homeowners, however, told BuzzFeed News during a visit that the town has been a place where they and their children feel at home among. So at least she, and again, I don't know, have any idea how many she interviewed, but she said two black homeowners, however, told BuzzFeed News during a visit that the town has been a place where they and their children feel at home among like-minded individuals, including the Chick-fil-A executives who make up some of their neighbors. And then she says, largely, members of the community said they still believe in Trilith's vision and wanted to make it better.
Largely, okay.
They demanded changes to Trilith's leadership structure. So listen to that wording. They demanded changes to Trilith's leadership structure. Structure, not specific individuals in the leadership who they thought were racist.
Okay.
Structure.
That's a good catch.
That's an important word there.
Structure.
Held emergency community meetings and wanted to talk to Cathy. Some people fed up with issues with their homes, along with frustrations about how racist incidents were being handled, chose to leave altogether. If what she's claiming is true, that this lady, used the N-word, that was definitely a racist incident. She displayed racist activity there. Might come from a racist heart overall.
Yeah.
Sure. At best, what you have there is one individual in a community who's racist. That doesn't show anything about the systemic structure. The other items that she does kind of mention in veiled form could potentially warrant investigation that could reveal that.
Sure.
But you see the leaps they're taking already. They're weaving this story together based on really only one strong piece of evidence, and these other subtle things that may or may not be, have to look very deeply into it, and then putting that together in this overall thing to show that Trilith is this way, and that they can demand that their leadership structure changes. In what way? What do they want it to change it? What do they want to change the structure into? So she continues here.
Okay.
This is an important, read this first sentence slowly.
At the top, the issues plaguing Trilith, white and black employees and residents say, are largely the result of its circle of executives and Cathy, who has been open about how his Baptist faith influences his business and his personal stance against marriage equality. envisioning harmony in the town without taking into account what that means for people who aren't white or evangelical Christians. Woo.
So there's the give, there's the tell. You know, you always have the
It's just
moment when
plain
somebody's
Trilith.
playing cards and they give the tell.
That.
So here, so you see in the sentence, there's a turn.
Sure.
Now it's Trilith is plagued with racism, these issues. And what is the plague due to? It's largely the result, according to these employees and residents, according to Buzzfeed. It's largely the result of its circle of executives and Cathy, who, why did they put Baptist faith instead of Christian faith? One can only wonder, but my guess would be because the Southern Baptist Convention right now is getting Me Too'd.
Oh,
and so you have the patriarchy here, right, in Cathy. You have, then he talks about, she talks about his business and personal stance against marriage equality. There's the LGBTQ.
Marriage equality.
So here's everything together. The fist with the rainbow flag around it.
I see. That's
Feminism, racism, and LGBTQ activism wrapped up in one. And what's the enemy of that? In her mind, and in many minds, it's the canonical oppressor, the white Christian heterosexual cisgendered male.
Shoot.
And so this is
Okay.
what she's trying. So when you're reading this article again, like
core.
what is the data? What's her thesis here? The thesis is right here in this paragraph. It's like the issues plaguing Trilith. Here's the real problem with all this stuff. It's his Christianity. It's his anti-gay, patriarchal, racist person, and it's his ideology.
Yeah.
It's the problem.
Holy smokes. Okay.
Now, this is where you want to ask the postmodernists, by whose standard is racism wrong? We believe it's wrong in the Bible because we have the Imago Dei.
Absolutely.
And because Christ made to bring every ethnic group together as one new man, one new woman under him, right?
Absolutely.
And so while it doesn't erase distinctions, it holds us all equal, is made in his image and all equal before the cross. That's why we don't show partiality. That's why we treat everyone with dignity and respect. Why would a postmodernist do that, though? They have no moral law, no objective moral law to appeal to. All they have is this card of racism to play to get power. And so, she has no leg to stand on, likely. Maybe she's one of those people who are trying to wed Christianity with critical theory. I don't know, which can't be done, but maybe she's that version. But postmodernism itself has no moral leg to stand on and rail at anybody, first of all. But we'll say as Christians, we want to take these accusations seriously because we think that racism is bad. But she wants to wrap this thing up into this massive ideology and lay the blame at the feet of evangelicalism. And it's just wicked bigotry and non-diverse, methods and ways. So I'm going to continue on here. Residents and former employees told BuzzFeed News there were few people of color in leadership roles. No place to file complaints, and no forum giving people at all levels of the community a place to be heard. So let's take those in, one by one. They told BuzzFeed that there are few people of color in leadership roles. That's not necessarily a problem biblically. It's the only question is not how many people are represented with skin hues. The question is, was there a fair hiring process, and did they hire people based on merit? If they did, it doesn't matter to me that there's 8 black folks on the basketball team out of 10. Did you get the best ones, or were you partial to them because they were black? If you did that, then you got a case.
Is also racist.
But you can't just count numbers. So that doesn't matter from a biblical perspective, whether or not how many people are in leadership roles based on what ethnicity. What matters, are they qualified? There's no place to file complaints, she says. I don't know how these communities run. I do know enough about Dan that if there was a legitimate complaint, I feel like he would bend over backwards 3 times to try to meet it. No forum giving people at all levels of the community a place to be heard. So maybe they open up a forum box. I don't think BuzzFeed really cares that they do that because that's not their aim. But if that's something that Trilith wants to do, great. If it's not and they want to move out, it's fine. To each their own in that sense. You could choose to not pay that, average $600,000 monthly
There's a lot of other places.
mortgage for your home there.
Sure.
So BuzzFeed News reached out to Cathy, town president Rob Parker, and Trilith Studios president Frank Patterson with a specific list of allegations from employees, former employees, and members of the community. Stephen Brown, a Trilith resident who handles PR for the town, said he would handle the response for all parties. Quote, Trilith is a place for everyone, and this story is incomplete, inaccurate, and mischaracterizes the mission we devote ourselves to daily in providing a supportive and collaborative place, unquote, his statement said. Brown and Trilith declined multiple times, she says, to respond to questions about what was inaccurate. Now, part of this is I understand why they don't want to talk to a propaganda rag like BuzzFeed. It's because they're inevitably going to take your words and spin them out of context. They're expert spin doctors. But on the other hand, sometimes I wish they would I wish that Brown and Cathy would get online and start talking about this stuff in public. Like, I think that's where it's at right now. Like, we've got to use our platforms to set the record straight. And so, I'm kind of with the writer on this one. Like, let's hear your response. Like,
sure.
If you're saying it was inaccurate, tell us why. Show us. Don't hide behind it, and don't try to fix it behind the scenes and just try to make the problem go away. I'd rather see it confronted. And, I see you're kind of like waving.
Yeah, I just think, there's a side to you don't cast your pearls. If you know they're just after just bringing him down, attacking his faith, there's a way of like going about it where you don't fuel that fire,
sure.
But yet you remain integral and you just do what you know is right outside of the limelight too. But I get it. I think this isn't the first time he's been attacked for his faith and his stance. And so it's like, I see this becoming a routine problem as far as accusing him or coming for this kind of thing. So
sure. And I'll see that, like that is an important point. There's probably some wisdom on knowing which battles to fight when.
Yeah.
But I feel like, and it might be one of those things where they're like, you know what, this little article, it's so untrue, it isn't worth my time.
Right.
It'll blow over. But part of the warrior side of
definitely,
me,
no doubt,
that gets frustrated by the woke mob and these woke propaganda rags wants me. I want people to. And let me hold that off.
We need to, the whole postmodernist thinking and the way of thinking is something that every believer should understand right now, because it opposes truth. It opposes getting down to the bottom of things. If there's no context, there's only narrative. And so anything can be spun a certain way. And sometimes that's the very reason you don't want to get down and get in the dirt with them. But at the same time, there's a side of exposing this. This is what this is. This is the kind of attack this is. And this is, it's everywhere. They say racism is everywhere. Critical race theory is everywhere.
That's true.
It's just as much everywhere.
Ever present.
It's systemic.
It is.
Anyway,
so, in here, we're still refraining from judgment about whether or not. No.
Go ahead.
No. But based on BuzzFeed and what I know about Trilith and Cathy, I would tend to put more weight on their testimony. But I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here and say, man, maybe they're not completely spinning this stuff, or making it up whole cloth. But you do see the critical theory elements peering through from time to time. So she goes on to quote Kayina Otober right here, who says, quote, "It is reality, all of us waving to one another and getting along until you step out of line. Once you step out of line, which is essentially what we have done, that's when you see the other reality behind the reality, the darker side, the side where there is still white supremacy going on." And I wonder, because white supremacy is another one of those phrases that have been radically redefined, and it can mean anything from, real right, what we used to call white supremacy, which is white supremacy, and the modern version, which is science is white supremacy. And so you don't know what does she mean by that? 2 + 2
is white supremacy.
And who is she talking about? Like, what is, who are these people? I wish, sometime when these conversations are going on, you really have to get in the details and figure it out. So I'm not going to read these stories in depth, but I will mention, some of the broad outlines of it. This is a family she's talking about where apparently they had some water damage in their house, and they kept calling the company there at Trilith, and they weren't able to get it fixed. And supposedly there's a white neighbors down the road that got it fixed quickly. Yeah, neighbors around them got it fixed too. There's seemed to be the only townhome that didn't get fixed, unquote. This guy named Craig that said that. Okay. Now, with a case like that, how do you figure out if there's racism if you want to invest? Now, if you're CRT, automatic. You don't have to ask any questions. But if you're trying to do a biblical case of saying, okay, was this motivated by racism? What do we have to find out? You're going to need to probably ask, okay, who took the calls?
Sure.
Did the people taking the calls know they were black? Why didn't they set up for their house to be fixed? What was the chain in there that broke down? You've got to do that investigation, because there could be all kinds of reasons. We just, could have been an oversight. They could be a bad worker. She could be, a bad administrator, didn't take the note well, whatever happened. But we definitely don't know from the story as it's presented here. We don't have any confidence that it was racism by itself.
No doubt. And when you look at, sometimes you look at reviews of companies with bad customer service, and it just says bad customer service.
Right.
It doesn't say racial or anything racial. It just gives a rating on their services. And so, but if you're African American or black, you walk in there, you can assume, if you're critical race theorist, you'll assume, okay, they are racist. Even though they have a reputation of just having poor service, it's because of racism towards you if you walk in there. Yeah.
And it does take a discipline of mind, right? Yeah. Because I've done that before. It's easy to get in that mentality, where you assume. Trying to think, even with Christianity, you can say, "Oh man, they didn't do this because I'm a Christian," but I wasn't careful in that case.
You're right. That's good.
To think through that, and just see, man, or maybe they're just bad at their job, or maybe there are other plausible explanations that I need to consider. Unless I have extra evidence, it requires more than just simply, we didn't get our house fixed and the white people down the street did. As a Christian, the atheist got his stuff fixed first, or people do that when they go in and they put their name in for a table.
That's good. Yeah,
you notice that
for sure. How long
somebody goes in before them, they'll assume man, they're being prejudiced against me, and they'll draw whatever conclusion they think right away.
No doubt.
Instead of being disciplined of mind to say, okay, let me investigate this a little bit. And that's what Sam Say said in one of his articles. He had to even fight that. He was walking down this dark alley, and this girl kind of shuddered when he walked by her and recoiled like she was scared. And he thought, man, he was mad because he thought she did that because he was black. And then he felt later, he was like, you know what? I shouldn't assume that. Maybe she got scared because I'm a man. I'm a big man, and it's night. And he was reminding himself that biblically, we have to be epistemologically virtuous. We have to want truth so much that we sometimes deny those snap judgments that are right there and kind of easy, dangling low fruit.
Yeah. And the hard part of that is sometimes there's reason to be wise and to recoil. If you're walking down a dangerous neighborhood or so, you'd be a fool to not be smart, to not look at your surroundings and not take steps towards safety. And so it's we can't throw our scruples out the window. We have to use our discernment. You have to be wise in all manners, but you have to be Christ-like in your wisdom and wield it to the best place possible. Be gracious until proven otherwise. Not to be gracious. Okay.
No, for sure. And so that's not to say there aren't scenarios where you can tell something's racist going on. And some people are really good at picking up subtleties. We all develop those things.
Yeah, for sure. It's we're not saying it's not real. It's just
we're just saying it's red glasses, so we don't know until we do. We have to know more in this case than simply the fact. And she's trying to weave together this cumulative case to show that it's characteristic of Trilith, or it's essential to Trilith.
Yeah, it's
that there's
everywhere in
systemic
Trilith.
racism.
It's a big old lie.
The problem is, like, even if you put 8 flimsy things together, you still have 8 flimsy things. You don't have 8 strong things that are coming together to create this strong argument.
Sure.
It's like leaky buckets. Like, you put one leaky bucket, you put water in it, put another leaky bucket. Well, the water keeps leaking through just slowly. You don't maybe see it, but they're all leaky buckets. And each of these examples, except for the ring thing, the ring camera that caught the lady saying,
yeah, now that's no
each
doubt.
of these examples are leaky buckets, and the reason is because they're reading into it in a snap judgment kind of way, and we need to know a lot more about this. It's at least as the reader to be able to draw any kind of conclusion that she wants us to draw. That in this case, that what did she say? The plague of racism. It's surely
that.
All right, so there's another person named Gapel here. They go through this, and apparently there was a police cruiser that tailed their son as he drove home from the basketball court. And, the storytelling element, it was the first time they'd seen a cop in their neighborhood. They had no idea who to turn to about what they saw as a clear example of racial profiling. So keywords there, what they saw, their perception, it was a clear example of racial it doesn't matter what their perception is. Was it racial profiling on the part of the cop, right? That's the question. Was it an unjust version of racial profiling? Because cops always profile. That's how they stay alive. But was this an unjust racial profiling that was built in some kind of systemic racism where they see every black as a criminal? This is interesting as I read on and listen to this. There were no black people involved in the homeowners association. That's another, what is that an allusion to?
Racism.
Disparity, right? There's no
diversity.
This is meant to move you in the direction of saying, see, it's racist. White supremacy is going on. There's no black people in the homeowners association. Therefore, that proves it as well. That's another leaky bucket, though. There was no diversity office or citizen advisory board. Thank God. Her husband ended up emailing town president Rob Parker, who responded immediately. So Rob Parker, he didn't say, get over it, did he? What did he do?
Let's see.
The town president. He responded immediately to the email. A few days later, Parker put together a meeting with the family in the Fayetteville police. That, to me, is going above and beyond. In a room of white men. Why does she say that?
Oh, gosh. Okay. Yeah.
Again, CRT at work. Including the town president and the police chief, who Geipel said would not address her or meet her eyes. She felt invisible. She said no real accountability or promise of action came from the meeting. What promise of action should come from the meeting? I ask you to consider as you read on.
Okay.
Fayetteville police told Buzzfeed News the officer had followed Dylan for a short time after receiving a report. They received a what?
A report.
A report that an unauthorized person was using Trilith's amenities. Police said the officer stopped. He did what? He stopped after checking the car's tag and determining it was registered to a home in the community. So he actually stopped.
Okay.
After meeting with the Geipel family, the department found the officer had followed policy and state law.
Followed policy.
So go back up to this. She said no real accountability or promise of action came from the meeting. The meeting was the accountability to do the investigation. The investigation revealed that they didn't do it. They were responding to a call. Now, the caller might have been racially profiling, but was the police officer racially profiling?
He was doing his job.
No, they were responding to a call and recognized when the tag lived there, he stopped following him. And she wants some kind of promise of action from the meeting.
They've done a good job of making it so that when a cop merely does his job, it is racial profiling every single time. Where I'm from, if I see a cop, I'm happy to see him. Follow me home. Make sure I make it safe. You know what I mean? So it's become a thing. It's too much. It's like poor officers, they can't do their jobs. They can't keep people safe without being called something or other. And so it's a new day for sure.
Yeah, man. I need to make that meme. It's been in my head for a while. This is your brain. This is your brain on CRT.
For sure.
It really does. It's such
tough.
a worldview. It's such a lens that you end up sounding like a crazy person if you stop and think about what she's saying.
Yeah.
Now,
She
you know,
wants to
was
kill
the
me.
neighbor out of line? Again, I don't know. I'd need to investigate.
Sure.
Maybe know the person was. You know, sometimes these turn out to be even other people that are ethnic minorities, those are really funny cases.
You know, but you know, I don't hear about it much anymore, and it could be going on where you look at people's social media and it's all just flooded with racial things and stuff like that. In that case, you could make a case.
Yeah.
But if a person calling is just calling out of concern or the officer responding, you know, that's just, it's ludicrous to think that they should
to
be held
make that
accountable.
leap, that assumption.
Go
And
ahead.
so that is the problem. So here she goes on. Geipel said that the family doesn't blame Trilith. It was the police who should have been more proactive against concerns of racial profile. So now we want the police to take the time and start engaging in counseling. They go to the neighbor's house and give them a lesson on racial profile.
Oh my
I mean, this is
goodness.
ridiculous. But she said the town's leadership was unprepared for an experience. Listen to this: that you can only understand if you are a minority.
Ooh.
Now, this is one of the central pillars of CRT or critical theory in general, ethnic Gnosticism. So again, that's the idea that you have double consciousness, or you have an ability to see things as they really are, only if you're in the oppressed side of the binary. So you have a special insight into reality if you're in the oppressed category in any given exchange. So if you're female and you're in it with a male, because they're patriarchal.
Hey, just kidding.
They represent the patriarchy. They can't understand.
Yeah,
and they can't.
that's
For instance, they
crazy.
can't speak to abortion issue.
Right.
Because they're man. They
don't have knowledge. They don't have biblical knowledge.
It's
or
also
any kind of
like
knowledge.
the believe women mantra came from that thing. Like you just because she's on the
Believe
bottom.
her
She's the victim in this case. So.
Merely because. Gotcha.
And it's connected to this idea. It's not the same exactly, but it's connected to this idea of what Vodi Bakum calls ethnic Gnosticism. So the idea that your ethnicity gives you special insight into knowledge that other people can't get. And the reason they have to appeal to that here is because clearly the objective data doesn't fit the narrative. So what you can do in those cases is you can play that card.
Yeah, pull that
and
card.
say, oh, you can't understand.
Just don't get it.
Why can't I understand? Well, I'm white. Well, he just said, and he's black. Well, he's the black face of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works. That's postmodern. That's the postmodern weapon that's utilized to prop up your point of view so nobody can criticize it. And that's where Geipel goes on and says, that is the underbelly of the friction, she said. They don't live it, so they don't get it.
The plague.
No, they don't get it because your case doesn't match. It didn't stand up to scrutiny. All right, I just want to give one more example here. It says in February 2022, entertainment industry veteran Carmen Key decided to permanently relocate from LA to Trilith. Key previously worked with Buzzfeed. I wonder if she was the one to kind of start this whole brouhaha, whose editorial operation is separate from Buzzfeed News. She was attracted to the company Town Life. Her 11-year-old son could walk to school. She was close to her office, where she worked as a consultant for a company that provides helicopters for film productions. And they could live in a new house in a close-knit community that had everything she needed. But she said that when she got there and settled into her new into her job, she saw there were hardly any other black people or non-black people of color working for the studio or in the building where she and other suppliers had offices. Quote, the majority of black people on the set seemed to be in service positions, cleaning, driving, or something of that sort, Key said. So here again, could that be the result of racist policies? It could be.
Sure.
But again, she has the red glasses on, assuming that this is because of this systemic racism that plagues this area. But that just isn't the case. Like, Thomas Sowell's work shows this in spades, that you can't draw a straight line from disparity to racism or prejudice or unjust laws. there's a lot of questions that go in that. I don't know, who are the people? Are these other executives from Hollywood that are coming in and bringing their crews, and they have, are they people that have worked with Chick-fil-A? Chick-fil-A as an organization has been connected over the years to the conservative white evangelical church. If they have more people that know them and are connected, might be more hires, because there's all kinds of, are there more people in the area that have been here longer and got those jobs? Or there's just so many questions. Maybe they're trying to help people and hire them in to these service jobs, and that's a new thing. And they're trying, who knows? But again, the idea here, the assumption behind it is that there are hardly any black people or non-black people of color working for the studio or in the building where she and other suppliers had offices. Therefore, what? Racism. That's the assumption. Okay, continuing on. She said she reached out to discuss the lack of diversity with some of Trilith Studios' top leaders and added that an executive told her, quote, "We want to have black people here, but we need to have people at a certain level," unquote. Now that quote is so short and seems out of context that you don't really know what he was saying there. Was he saying like basically these hires were merit-based hires? And so we can't prop up, like we can't engage in tokenism because we need the people to actually be equipped. Was that his response? Who knows? That would be a good one. Like, that's what I would say if somebody came to my NBA team and was like, "Hey, too many black folks. Gotta get some more Asians." I'd say, "We're here to win championships." I'm putting who's best on the court. Right. I don't have time for your PC stuff to come in so you can feel better about yourself and your virtue signaling. I just don't know. I don't know what that quote means there by itself. So I can't really draw any conclusions from that. Jay Hoffman, who is white, she's really good on
yeah. She really embellishes
I love
sentences.
it, man. This is so funny. Like, this is where we at,
Who is white.
Not anything about their ideology.
No character
Jay Hoffman,
comments.
Who has, a background in business and a master.
None of that.
Jay Hoffman, who was white.
Faithful to his wife.
Right?
None of that. Okay.
And served as the town's creative director for about a year and a half before she was fired. In her words, quote, clash of vision in November 2018 echoed Key's experience.
Echoed, okay.
She told BuzzFeed News that even in Trilith's early days, most of the studio and town employees were white and cut from the same conservative religious cloth. So in the early days of Trilith, most of them were white and conservative evangelicals. Now, Dan Cathy, Chick-fil-A again.
Sure, yeah.
Probably most of the people, he rolls with knows, just like if I went to, when I go to Atlanta, for instance, and I worked with Donnie McClurkin. I had no expectation that, a 10th of his band, a 20th of his band, or a 50th% of his band had to be other than anything he wanted it to be. They were all black. That's who he knew. Yeah. That was they were bad musicians. He hired them. He might have given me a token spot.
Hey.
But I was like, I'll take it. I'll take it there, Bishop. Saying? But this idea is like, even with Kirk, like, it's there's this idea that you must, that's a moral imperative to go out of your way to think racially and hire according to that one feature is just nonsense.
Yeah, to even have your mind and heart so programmed to question that as the number one thing everywhere you go. What is the percentage? What is how diverse is anything? And not that's the primary, not character, not wholeness, and nothing other than. And I remember that shift happening when I would go out to meet friends for coffee or hang out, and race became the number one thing. Even though we live in the kingdom of God, even though Jesus is king, race came first. And I was like, wow, what a work this thing has done to people's minds. It's like, if you go to church, how diverse is it? If you go to school, how diverse is it? If you own a business, how diverse is it? If you start anything, what diversity is the number one thing? Not does it honor God? What does it? Is it real? Is it legit? Is it integral? Race has become the number one thing in our nation. Interesting
man.
times.
And
Number one.
so, if you think back critical theory solves
Sure.
the social binary, oppression through hegemony, lived experience, which is the ethnic Gnosticism, and then social justice is the remedy. This is all through this. So the social binary, and people that just heard my example with Donnie McClurkin or the NBA, for example, would say that's misguided. Why? Because I'm talking about black folks and they're the oppressed.
Sure.
So racism can only go one way on this thing, which is why they will hear that and think I'm off my rocker because I haven't used the right example. They say only white people need to diversify, or whoever the oppressor is in any given category.
I hear you.
And, if there was something unjust done in a particular instance, you need to make restitution for that for sure. But this just blanket CRT is foolishness. And I'm trying to expose that with these examples. And I also realize that advocates or adherents to critical race theory wouldn't accept them because racism only goes in the one direction according to the binary.
I hear them.
But, that's so important what you said, babe, is like they have really done a number here.
It's everywhere. It's the number one question asked.
Yeah, even to you at Liberty, right, when you worked there.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, oh, that's right. That's what people want to know. How diverse. Diversity is it's the new rubric. It's not anything to do with character, how Christian it is, or how biblical, how right, how's it doing? Is it falling apart? Diversity is the number one virtue or sin, if it's a lack thereof.
And it's a funny type of diversity. In the case of race, it's like completely based on this what they would even call a social construction of race. And we've got to make that the thing that we're diverse about, or your sexual proclivities. We've got to make that the things you're diverse about. What they don't want is diversity of opinion with regard to racism. They don't want the. What if you're like, you know what? Trilith doesn't have enough racist people. I heard there's a lady down the street. She likes to use the N-word a lot. Let's get her in here.
Gosh,
Would they say, "Oh man, that's really diverse"? No, they don't. Not. It's a trick of language. And I would say this too, because they say the intent. This person saying the intent for diversity was at Trilith, but the actions fell short. I'm going to come back to more of this later, but I would say be careful making your intention for anything diversity. If Trilith is doing that, you're really opening yourself up for these types of criticisms. What you need to make your intention for is to be impartial and be just.
Oh, that's good.
And be honest.
Oh, that's good.
And be dignifying of everybody. You don't need to make your intention diversity. Because if you do, that word is already loaded. It's impregnated with critical theory. And critical theory will eat you up.
Yeah. If that ends up happening as a byproduct, great. But making that the number one thing it falls short of true biblical unity.
Yes.
In Christ.
Yeah. See the person. That doesn't mean you ignore their awesome culture and where they're from. And that doesn't mean you don't open your mind to oh man, there's beautiful things and other expressions and enjoying. You can enjoy the diversity of God's creation and the diversity of cultures insofar as they line up with the ways of Christ. But if you make your aim in something diversity, it's automatically going to take you down a bad road. Let that be a byproduct of godliness, and it will be a beautiful one.
Yeah.
And like we've done that in ministry, I've seen churches that have gone after diversity, and it inevitably ends up like this. But when we ran our young adult ministry, it was it ended up being super diverse in an ethnic way.
Yeah.
And in many ways, many more important ways even.
Yeah.
People that normally wouldn't have come together. Like you had intellectuals, you had business people, you had people that weren't intellectuals at all but loved, the arts, and you had them having conversations, and it was really very interesting. And also, down the road, we also probably had one of the most racially diverse ministries, but it was never something and some people might say, well, it was easy for you guys because you're an interracial couple. May or may not be the case, but either way, I think that I've seen other examples of the same thing. When you present the gospel and you live it out, people of all ethnic backgrounds will feel comfortable, even if it's like, man, I don't get this kind of music. It's not my favorite kind of this. But when there's real fellowship, real koinonia fellowship,
That's good.
it naturally breaks down those walls instead of aiming for this and trying to rig this radical outcome.
Yeah, forced.
Egalitarian. It's so forced, man. I hate tokenism. I hate it.
Okay.
But here's a quote here, is starting to wrap up here, but I think this is the Hoffman lady still. So she said, "It seems like there was and is not enough understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion really mean," she said. "I tried to get more people of color hired, and they told me they don't have the budget for that beyond entry-level openings at the time." Well, did they not have the budget to hire anybody in those positions at the time? If that's the case, then that's the case. That's not racism. If they specifically wouldn't hire a person of color because they were a person of color,
Yeah, that's the
and would hire someone that's not, then that's racism. But that doesn't seem like what she's saying here. And that the way that's worded again is it's rhetorically loaded in a dishonest direction, I think. But the important part I want to point out with this before we wrap up is this. Notice the language here: diversity, equity, inclusion. That's like the holy trinity of critical race theory. And every university has to have one of those organizations, unfortunately, because most of them are terrible. They're just Marxist organizations that are brainwashing students more than even their classes are. But what they're talking about often in these things is inclusion, is the radical sexual anarchy, LGBTQ agenda. Equity is often equality of outcomes, making sure you have the right tokens and people represented in all strata of your leadership board, whether it merits it or not. Diversity, again, we've already talked about that one. So clearly what's going on here is infused with critical theory. And so I think it's important to recognize what's happening in an article like this, because rarely will you see someone come out and just say, yeah, we want to support critical race theory, because those words, thankfully, that theory, at least the explicit version, has been exposed. But still, these elements are what's important, that you recognize how they're diagnosing the problem, how they're seeing reality, and how they want to fix it. And really, I think at the end of the day, what's despised most by this BuzzFeed article writer is Dan Cathy's Christian worldview making headway into the arts. They hate Chick-fil-A because of that same reason. They continue to come after them for that same reason. What they don't like is biblical Christianity. And there's a reason, because biblical Christianity is directly at odds with critical theory. It's directly at odds with the Marxist vision. And it stands in the way of Breonna Sack's vision for humanity. She has a moral framework here. It's rootless and it's foundationless, but she has a clear moral framework. And she wants to impose that on people. And what's standing in her way is this biblical Christianity. And so what I want to say to this, if Mr. Cathy ever happens to listen to our little podcast, we have so much respect for you. You have honored us well, and it was amazing to get to come to your gathering at this place a couple years ago and lead worship. And we are with you. We will stand with you. We have brought, I think, some just criticisms in the past of some of the moves of Chick-fil-A, especially the ones where they stopped funding Salvation Army and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I thought that was, I did not think that was a good thing, and I was really disappointed in that. I do think there's been a couple things since then, too, that I don't think have been the best moves. And what I want to do from a humble place is just plead with Mr. Cathy and the board members, the executive board members, to don't fall into this trap, please. Don't give 1 inch to the woke mob. Don't give any breathing room to this critical theory and Marxism. I would encourage you to stop even trying to go after directly diversity. And I would just encourage you to stand on biblical principles. If do you have reason to investigate that there is a systemic problem, then investigate it.
Yeah.
And bring bring the heat where it's justified, where you can make a difference in helping people honor each other as human beings. Do that. That's awesome, and that's amazing. I love the vision for Trilith. It's an amazing place. But I will say this, the woke ideology is a one-way street, and it has no stop-off. It has no exits. It will not stop until you completely bow to the full agenda and become an ally of this Marxist worldview. There's no place to kind of placate it in between. And so I just want to encourage, it's time for Christians. It's time for us to stiffen our backbones. And it's also time for us to really get a clear biblical worldview, understand biblical justice and the difference between it and social justice, and to accurately pick apart these elements and remove them as we try to apply the Christian principles of love for neighbor. And so hopefully this episode has been helpful and just kind of how to break down these articles and see the worldviews behind it, the assumptions and the presuppositions that are driving the narrative. Are some of these things true? Maybe. If certain ones are true, they need to be fixed. Hopefully they'll work on this. I do know that it's Dan's heart to love people. And I know that if there is truth in this, he will get to it and find it and work on it. I just pray as it's being worked on, do not give into the diversity, equity, inclusion movements and what they want to do and all the tokenism and all that stuff. Don't be pressured into that. Stand biblically, equal weights and measures, impartiality, love for all, respect for all. Bless you guys. We'll see you next time.